Hello everyone, this is Tom Southern at Purple Arch Neurorehabilitation. What I wanted to come and talk to you today about was a disease process that I spend greater than 50% of my time working with in both home health and in my private practice, and that's the disease process of Parkinson's disease. Now I do want to tell you from the start that this disease process is personal to me. About 4 years ago, my mom was diagnosed with Parkinson's. Mom is 69, she's young, all right? Mom's got Parkinson's. And so, I tell my patients this all the time. When I walk in there to see them, I might walk in and see a guy that's 75 years old and a woman that's 90 years old with Parkinson's. I walk in there and tell them the way I'm going to treat you, the way I'm going to talk to you is the same way that I would to my own mother. Conversely, when I've had conversations with my mom, I tell her, look, I'm giving you the same instruction that I am with the people that I see out in the field. Okay, so Parkinson's disease is a disease that we primarily associate with dopamine. Dopamine's a neurochemical. It's responsible for a lot of things, but in regards to Parkinson's disease, it's poor regulation of dopamine out of the substantia nigra and of the basal ganglia. You'll typically hear the basal ganglia mentioned more in the literature. We say it's a disease of the basal ganglia. There's a number of things that we see clinically with people in speech pathology who have Parkinson's disease. Clearly one of them is speech. There's two motor speech deviations that we typically will see. In about 90% of patients, the literature tells us that we're going to see people with what's called dysarthria. The most prevalent one is hypokinetic dysarthria. We have fancy words for everything in speech, if you didn't know. Hypokinetic, break it in half, less movement, okay? And about 10% of people with Parkinson's, they might have a mixed hyperkinetic dysarthria. There's more movement associated in that one. The movement's still pretty small though. In a significant number of people, we see a thing called vocal dysphonia. Vocal dysphonia means that they don't have a lot of voice coming out. And so when you couple these ideas together of vocal dysphonia with hypokinetic dysarthria, you end up with a speech production that's quiet and not very well articulated. So it's sometimes we say that the person's speech intelligibility, which is a measure of words that we understand that they may say to an unfamiliar listener, that their speech intelligibility is going to be reduced because one, we can't hear them, and in some cases we can't understand them because the reduction of movement is less. Now, for those of you who have had LSVT Loud, who have worked with the Parkinson's Voice Project and Speak Up, you will know that one of the big things that we work with to help people with issues related to speech production in Parkinson's disease is amplification, voice amplification. And I try not to get too much into the science with the people that I see, but I will tell you this. Loudness does help cover a lot of sin in speech production. It doesn't work all the time, but if you use your dad voice, if you use your mom voice, typically your articulators are going to move bigger. We're trying to create amplification of movement. So I think if we keep that in mind, it does help it make it a little bit easier to understand. We also deal with issues related to cognition, so in thinking, memory, problem solving, reasoning. We work with people who have swallowing difficulties. That fancy term would be dysphagia. There's about 40, the numbers are all over the place for swallowing. It's between 40 and 90% of people with Parkinson's disease are going to have some form of dysphagia during their disease process. Now again, I will tell you this and be 100% sincere saying it. Just because a swallowing issue might arise within the Parkinson's disease process does not mean that it cannot be managed. The research shows us that well over 98% of people with Parkinson's disease should be forever oral eaters, oral feeders. It might not look like it did 10 years ago in some cases, but in the vast majority of the time it is. And that's where, working with your speech pathologist to make sure you're on the most appropriate diet texture, that we have you working on the most appropriate, very targeted exercises, that if we're using neuromuscular electrical stimulation, if we're using surface MEG, whatever, as long as we're doing it from a targeted standpoint, your loved one should be able to continue to accept hydration and nutrition by mouth and be able to enjoy eating and drinking. Okay. I do want to come back to one idea related to speech, because that really is probably where I spend 75% of my 50% of my clinical time working with Parkinson's patients. There was a wonderful article published in June of 2017 by Yorkston, Baylor, and Britton. It's published in the American Journal of Speech Language Pathology. It was titled the Experience of People with Parkinson's Disease and Implementation for Intervention. One of the brilliant things in this article was that they really talked to people with Parkinson's, and they talked about their experiences. And they make a very clear distinction between speech and speaking. Okay, between speech and speaking. In my practice, I talk about structured versus unstructured. So structured speech would be those things that we do in LSVT or in maximum respiratory effort. Those are those, you sit down, you do the work, and you've done your practice for the day. The unstructured aspects of your practice, that's when your daughter walks by and you say, "Hey, where are you going on your date tonight? You gonna be home at 10?" But you make that cognitive effort to utilize a strategy, because that's where the carryover happens. That's where the magic happens in making interventions work. So I would encourage you, if you have access to it, pull up that article. Again, it's in the American Journal of Speech Language Pathology and was published in June of 2017. A connection that I made to that article was actually, I talked about this a few videos ago in the ABCs of communication disorders, and how we have the affective, behavioral, and the cognitive. The intervention plans that you're working on with your clinician, that's most of the time that's behavior. We're trying to make that voice louder, trying to make that articulation bigger. We want you using those articulators. But what the patients in this study talked to us about, or talked to the researchers about, was the need for you as the clinician, you as the caregivers, if you're a caregiver watching this, to understand the affective piece and the cognitive piece that are a part of this disease process. Affective, as a reminder, affective has to do with emotion and how you process the emotion around it. As a person who stutters, I get ticked off when I have a bad fluency day. I could just imagine what it's like to be a person with Parkinson's disease who gets frustrated because their voice can't be heard, or somebody doesn't understand them because their articulation's off because of dysarthria. But then there's the cognitive piece that we have to really think about as well. And how do they think about these things we've trained them for in the behavioral element? How do they think about the use of reduced rate of speech? How do they think about increasing their rate of speech? How do we get them to think about maybe sometimes pre-planning some statements? Like I used the example of talking to my daughter when she comes back, going out for a date. That might be, if I'm a person with Parkinson's disease, that might be something that I'm kind of pre-planning, almost pre-scripting. And it takes a lot of cognitive load. And I think as caregivers and clinicians, we have to understand that. It's not just turning on that switch and that louder voice comes out. You know, when it comes down to an end, and I think what the big distinction that I think these researchers made in their discussion with the patients that they interviewed was, or surveyed, was that people have a story to tell. You know, for those of you that have been on my page for a long time, I use that line a lot. Let me share my story. Your job as a clinician, your job as a caregiver, yes, it's to encourage good utilization of behaviors, but first and foremost, you're there to help that person share their story. And you can't forget that. You cannot forget that. That's what they hired you for. So I'm sorry I got up on a little bit of a soapbox there. But again, Parkinson's is a personal process. What I would encourage, if you have any questions, what I would encourage you to do is reach out to me. My email is tom@purplearchneuro.com. You can check out I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. You can look up Purple Arch Neuro. I pop up. You can see my smiling face. Also on Google, you'll see me up there. Email me. Check us out on any of the social media platforms. I do appreciate every one of you who has sent in questions. I've tried to answer everybody via email if I can. If you want to have a phone conversation sometime, awesome. I'm all in. Thank you for spending time with me talking about Parkinson's. I look forward to hearing from each of you. If you have questions, if I don't talk with you again before Christmas and the New Year, have a Merry Christmas. Have a great New Year, and looking forward to 2021.